This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest is joining me today remotely from Chicago, Adam Cieslak, co-founder and head brewer for Maplewood Brewing in Chicago, Illinois. Welcome to the podcast, Adam.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, you've been on our radar for a number of years. We did a breakout brewer story on Maplewood a few years ago. And along with that, for Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine readers, you can access the Son of Juice homebrew scaled recipe that you guys provided along with that story. Over the years, we've also reviewed quite a few Maplewood beers, and you can go check out those reviews on beerandbrewing.com. I do recall a certain American Pale Ale Charlatan that scored a 96 from the blind judges at Craft Beer and Brewing. And of course, you've won a couple of GABF medals for that same Charlatan APA, as well as a GABF medal for Fat Pug, your oatmeal stout.
Yeah, those are actually the first two beers we commercially released, oddly enough. But Charlatan is that's our baby. That's our, it's as classic as can be. It's our homage to, just all the great American pales that came out in the early days of craft brewing. Sierra Nevada obviously comes to mind, but
sure,
it's classic and it's good. And I feel like it's one of those ones that have enough hops where kind of hop heads can drink it. Regular folks who may not be into super hoppy beers can drink it. It's good. It's just balanced,
Well, let's talk a little bit about that a little later on. I'd love to kind of follow this arc from these classics that you do, like Fat Pug Oatmeal Stout and Charlatan APA, and of course your lager program. And then you span all the way into the hippest of current styles with everything from pastry stouts to hazy fruited IPAs.
And we got a blue raspberry sour coming out next week or a couple of weeks rather. So it's kind of it's pretty big dichotomy.
For sure. We'll kind of follow that spectrum along and see where we go. But first, G&D Chillers, born in the Pacific Northwest from a lot of hard work and a singular goal, they've become the best damn chiller company in the world. Like you, G&D never settles. They are relentless and strive to be better every single day because they take pride in the work they do. They're craftsmen who know that good enough just won't cut it. Visit G&D Chillers at the CBC, booth 3011, or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, even the best yeast deserves a helping hand with seltzer fermentation, which is why Pathfinder N-Pure Seltzer Nutrient ensures reliable and complete fermentation of a seltzer base while providing a clean, neutral fermentation profile. Not to mention it provides all the essential nutrients required by yeast for production of hard seltzer bases fermented from those sweet, refined sugars. Give your seltzer yeast a boost by visiting bsgcraftbrewing.com and searching for Pathfinder N-Pure Seltzer Nutrient, or call BSG at 1-800-374-2739. I just have to say, I love that we've got CBC booth numbers now in our sponsor reads, because that means it's happening in person. And oh my God, I can't wait to get back to that. It was a weird week this past week because we were in Denver for our very first live event, our Brewery Accelerator event, and our 9th Brewery Accelerator event here in Denver. But it was also kind of a sad week because it was the end of an era for Falling Rock Tap House after 24 years. And I do just want to say out here that thank you to the Blacks and to Falling Rock for all they've contributed to craft beer. If you want to go listen, I did talk to Chris on the podcast a couple years ago, and we had a spirited conversation about that. But I did get over there on Wednesday, right as they reopened for the last week. And, it was fun to see everybody. I wish we were all under better circumstances, but a lot of folks came in for that, and it was great to pay our respects to their contribution to craft beer. Having said that, Adam, let's talk about Maplewood and let's talk about you all. Give me a quick history of your brewing history and, of course, how Maplewood came to be.
Okay. Well, I started, a long time ago, I think in I mean, we started as a home brewer, like a lot of people, just
Sure, sure.
started with a hobby, fell in love with it, just kept doing it. Maybe I think 2005-ish is when it started home brewing. And it was one of those things that, uh, you know, almost 10 years later was still home brewing. And over that span of time, just became obsessed with it essentially. I was at a different job industry that I wasn't necessarily just happy doing it, and
Sure.
have no kids, no anything at the time. And my wife and I, we were talking about, I had been talking about wanting to open something for a really long time. And my business partner, Ari, was in a similar situation where the timing was really good to go for it. And we just decided to go for it in 2014. Um, and we opened, first beers went out, I think, toward the end of that year in September. So really our first full year of production was in 2015. But my background is homebrewing. And I mean, before that, I was in engineering and all sorts of science-based stuff. So when we started getting to the point where we knew we were going to open a brewery, which was a few years before 2014, started taking even more so of a really disciplined approach for it. May or may not have acquired Siebel, books and all that stuff that you can get if you actually go to a brewing school or, work with other trained brewers. But we had enough friends in the industry and enough resources to really buckle down and start planning things to
Talk to
open
me
our
about
own.
that. Sure, sure. Talk to me about that original idea for Maplewood. Now you're even in 2014, 2015, there was still a lot of breweries and definitely even more coming. It was easy to see that at the time, even though I guess we all still thought, oh, the plateau must be coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
But even in Chicago, and in Chicago now is an incredibly dense market, with I think over 150 breweries just in the metro Chicago area. Thinking about how you add something to that community of brewing, had to, present some, particular pressure. There's something about serving a neighborhood certainly there, but how did you guys conceive of the beer that you're going to brew and what you wanted to be known for?
So yeah, the Chicago landscape, like you said, I mean, there was a fair amount of breweries then, not like I mean, now it's got to be triple the amount as compared to then. But we wanted to open a brewery and distillery, which we did. We were the first in Illinois, one of the first few in the country to have, I guess, both in one space. And we wanted to be able to present to folks both beer and spirits made from similar or the same exact grain, do barrel aging in our own barrels in-house, and offer kind of a unique experience in that sense. And that was the initial kind of angle plan we wanted to go after.
Distilling with no professional distilling experience behind that has to be a
Well,
particularly intimidating thing to
I
tackle.
can't, I mean, legally, I can't say we distilled before then, but there may or may not have been distilling going on during the home brewing sessions, which are very much legal. So if distilling happened to happen, it may have happened, but
Sure, you were distilling ingredients that may not have
that's
produced
right.
alcohol, but certainly
Right.
gave you the experience distilling. Okay,
Yeah.
I see where you're going with that.
Yeah.
Because distilling, in my mind, adds a whole additional level of danger, to the production process, and not that brewing is not dangerous; it can be very dangerous in various things, but the number of once you add distilling into that mix, things get even more combustible than they already are.
Combustible explosive vapors. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it was interesting. I mean, now seeing where we're at now and everything, you kind of learn as you go. Would I have done the exact same thing? Maybe, maybe not. But it's one of those things where that was our idea, and we are gonna figure it out and make it happen. And yeah, it was tough. I mean, you definitely
Sure.
gotta be able to learn quickly and figure things out. And we didn't have a massive budget to start with. We were, you know, way underfunded for what we probably should have had. But hey, that's how you learn. Or I mean, sink or swim type of thing. We wanted to do it, so we were just hell bent on figuring it out.
Yeah. So talk to me about the business model, taproom focus, production focus, food. How did you guys think about the hospitality experience that you're going to provide?
So we were kind of production focused from the start, just because it took us a long time to get the permits and everything needed to open the tap room. Chicago can sometimes take a while with that stuff, and it did. But we obviously we wanted to have the tap room open as soon as we could, and serve what we could outside the tap room and go with distribution for the rest. And as things turned out, like I said, it took, I don't know, a year and a half, almost 2 full years to get the tap room fully up and running. So
Wow.
we had to focus on distribution right from the get go, which honestly, it was, you lose those margin points on using a distributor right off the bat, but it definitely helped us get a really good leg up on developing account relationships, distributor relationships. And so when it came time to, scale up production even more, we had some experience under our belt, and we're able to go from 10, 20 barrel batches to using some contract partners and do 200, 400 barrel batches, and
Wow.
actually have a distribution network kind of in place to support that. Um, so it just worked out that way.
Sure.
Had we had were we able to open the tap room sooner? Absolutely. I mean, because
Yeah.
that tap rooms are great. That's the lifeblood of a kind of a small brewery, getting everything going. Um, but it's one of those things we just had to figure out another way because ours was taking forever.
Sure.
So,
Sure. How much beer do you all produce in a given year this year, say?
so we actually grew last year, which is kind of crazy. Thanks to everyone in Chicago, well, everywhere who supported us over the whole pandemic. We had crazy weeks in the tap room for to go. On premise consumption wasn't open, but we had our tap room open just for to go
Right.
stuff. And we had weeks there where we were blowing out of the water like last summer's numbers just in volume. So
Sure.
people were eager to take stuff home, and it was awesome. And we just had to make a lot more beer. So we finished last year, I think, around 16,500, somewhere
Wow.
around there, maybe a little more.
You guys are
Um,
solidly into regional brewery territory now then.
yeah,
Huh.
we had some pretty good growth over the last few
Yeah.
years, and credit our sales team and our marketing teams,
Right.
and I think our whole, I don't know, we have a really
Sure.
good team here who's able to keep us out there and in the stores, which is pretty awesome.
Well, last year was the year to have beer out in general distribution and selling it through distributors with that kind of, production model. Also, the distributors, everyone that I've talked to had good years last year. And so, it just goes to show this, effects of the pandemic were not distributed evenly. They
Right.
are, and even within that, within categories of breweries that were impacted most, it's hard to find hard and fast rules around that. Some, even with larger distribution, still suffered through that, and others found some silver linings in there. And so, we'll continue to just recover and unpack and think about those things. Certainly, those with primarily hospitality based models, especially the beer bars out there, have suffered in some of the worst possible ways. But
Yeah, it was definitely, like you said, like there's so many of our accounts and bars that we love to go to. Just seeing them struggle or
yeah,
close down entirely, it was not a great year for that. Obviously,
yeah,
it's
yeah. Well, let's pivot and talk about some of the beers that you brew. But before we do that, the most common complaint about hard seltzers, they need more flavor. Extract alone is a weak flavoring agent and can leave a chemical aftertaste, but there is a better way. The craft concentrate blends from Old Orchard are packed with real fruit first, no added sugars, just enough natural flavor. Breweries are turning to Old Orchard concentrates for seltzer with more body, color, and aroma, turns seltzer skeptics into supporters with seltzer that drinks like a beer. Get started at www.oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, for years, BreweryDB has been the industry's only professionally curated source of brewery and beer information. In 2019, over 1 million brewery visits were made by craft fans searching for breweries on brewerydb.com. In just a few weeks, BreweryDB will unveil an all-new experience to help craft lovers get back on the brewery trail to take full advantage of the enhanced marketing power of BreweryDB and increase your taproom traffic. Set up your account on marketmybrewery.com. That's marketmybrewery.com. It's easy and it's free. So, Adam, as you guys launched Maplewood, clearly you love the classics and you have some of these kind of, core classic beers. Talk to me about how you envision this beer program for Maplewood, and then maybe walk me through, how some of that started to shift as your consumers told you what they wanted from you.
Yeah, I mean, we started. The problem with us is that we kind of celebrate all sorts of different styles of beer.
That's a problem.
Yeah. So it's hard to focus on any one particular style or whatever lane as it is.
Sure.
And there's so many different people out there who have obviously wide range of styles. Just like, our personal tastes are all over the place. So we wanted to get really good at brewing all sorts of stuff, whether it's lagers, traditional lagers, American pales, transitioning and bringing in some more modern hazies or IPAs or these fruited sours. And we also have a fruiter program, which is now finally really coming into its own. That took a while to get all the cultures in there and each fooder built up, and
just in time for nobody to buy that beer.
yeah. That's kind of how it is, especially in Chicago. We need some more
mixed fermentation fooder beer is definitely a labor of love. Beer the brewers make for themselves and a few people that also can appreciate it.
That's it. But so we wanted to get really good at different styles, and because we have a diverse production team, as far as tastes go, we kind of all brought different things to the table and learned from each other, and really gave different styles the respect they deserve. For a lager or whatever, we just did a Dortmunder, paying attention to, the nuances that really make a really good Dortmunder versus a hazy IPA where we want the hops to be just pouring out of the can, the glass, whatever it is, and kind of going overboard with stuff. But we just wanted, like I said, we wanted to focus on everything, which is not really a focus. That's just kind of a catch-all. Right. But our whole model from day one has been, if we're going to put out something, we want to do it right and do it well, whether it's new school and over the top crazy, like a pastry stout or whatever, or if it's as classic as a Pilsner, German Pilsner or something like that. We wanted to do it well, and we put in a lot of effort into tweaking our processes for different styles. We are hell-bent on paying attention to water profiles for different styles. Every single beer has a different water profile tailored to what we're trying to achieve. And I think just paying attention to details like those really can help beers stand out in a crowded marketplace, because at the end, there's a lot of good breweries out there, and it's subtle differences that just maybe add a little more depth to your beer or a little more hop aroma or whatever it is that will help, beer stand out. So it's always on our mind. What can we do to make whatever style it is better and do it well? And that's it. That's our philosophy as it is.
Sure, sure. Well, I appreciate that you apply that to accessible styles for everyday craft beer drinkers with, things like your oatmeal stout or the Charlatan APA. Let's talk about that American Pale Ale, because clearly it has been a winner for you all, both with consumers and certainly with judges of various sorts. Getting into the pale ale space is an intimidating one because there's this one brewery out there that seems to do I would say almost a perfect job with it, and delivers over and over again. Sierra Nevada Pale Ale is certainly the American standard for that beer, and one that, brewers of all stripes will, drink and enjoy no matter what the circumstance. In fact, I had one last Wednesday, a Falling Rock, because
That's awesome.
ordered for me by a certain brewer, and it just felt like one of that one beer that we should definitely drink at Falling Rock, in that kind of place and that kind of time, just to, because it's such a classic. So you get into this market and you're going to make an American Pale Ale. Well, how do you set yourself apart in this kind of space? And, talk me through some of the idea behind building a recipe for that.
Okay. Well, Sierra Nevada, like you said, that's perfect. We're not going for that aromatic profile. Theirs has a little bit more of a malt character and different hops than we use in Charlatan. So in our market, we wanted to have something that was inspired a little bit by the West Coast IPAs. Slightly drier finish, little bit more bitterness to it, although Charlatan is not a bitter beer by any means, but it's probably toward the higher end of the spectrum for American pales, and have a really clean, bright hop aromatic to it and flavor with some malt to balance that out. So I guess
I should also mention in Chicago where you are, there's also this other pale ale that's, was one of this kind of pioneering Citra beers, I believe, that, with Half Acre Daisy Cutter, and so you are, also positioning, as a different, beer compared to that. That definitely takes a more new school approach. And you were angling for something a little bit more classic, but also not the Sierra Nevada classic.
We love Daisy Cutter, and I'd be lying if that wasn't on our mind when we were developing Charlatan. We saw a lot of Daisy Cutter handles out there, and we're like,
it's fantastic beer.
It's a great beer, and in our mind, there's room for two American pales in the city. So we wanted to come up with one that was, that could compete with that really, and uses a blend of kind of classic, modern, and new school hops, citrus, Centennial, and Simcoe. And that was it. That was the game plan. We tried several different yeasts in there, settled on San Diego Super to help it attenuate more. So you get this really nice dry finish. Accentuates, or I should say doesn't accentuate, but leaves room for the aromatics. It's super clean. For the homebrewers out there, if you haven't used San Diego Super, an IPA or a pale, and you're using Chico or something like that, give it a try. It's phenomenal. It's just, in my opinion, I like the extra attenuation you get. Other than that, it's really clean.
Where do you try to finish with that one?
For Charlatan?
Yeah.
Or in mid twos, mid to low twos. Leave some body in there it's as far as American pales go, I think it's on the higher end of the ABV spectrum. So we're at 6.1. So I forget what their style guides are at, but I know that's just like toward the higher end of it. But we wanted some body in there and some, roundness to just balance that slight increase in alcohol and the hop load. We're actually dry hopping that at a rate that's probably closer to IPAs, not really up to that pounds per barrelage, but getting there. So I don't know. I love beers when you open the can and you just smell it before you even lift it to your nose, and that's what we try to achieve with Charlatan. But also, being crushable, really drinkable, finishes clean, goes well with a ton of food, stuff like that.
Yeah. How do you build a malt base, out of that one? Is it just straight two
Well,
row, or what else do you sprinkle in there?
we used to use two row as the base. We switched that to a Pilsner base a few years ago, just because we were using so much Pilsner malt, and it frankly made our ordering process easier. And
Sure.
if anything, the two row versus the Pilsner, there wasn't a whole lot of difference from their contributions. Our specialty malt in Charlatan is just a touch of Munich and a touch of uh, English style crystal, but very light. So those were
Yeah.
doing the, I guess, the heavy lifting as far as providing some malt to the beer, and switching to Pilsner kind of let those malts come through a little bit more, and let the hops come through a little bit more. But it's primarily, base malt, raw Pilsner, and then we just have small percentages of crystal, Munich, a touch of white wheat, like 3%. I love white wheat and hoppy beers. I don't know what it is. I feel like it's almost
Even at
like,
3%.
yeah, I feel like it's like salt or something. It's not
Yeah.
salty, but it kind of brings everything together. It has this weird property, in my opinion, that it just lets everything, it brings it all together. I don't know if it smooths everything out or what it is, but to me, it's a definitely a different beer without that small percentage of wheat in there, and then just some dextrin for some extra little bit of body, and that's it. That's the
Yeah.
recipe.
You mentioned water is an important component on this one. How do you adjust your water for pale ale in order to to help put the fine points on it?
So we use Chicago water is actually pretty good foundationally, except for the chlorine in it. So obviously that's horrible
Yeah.
for beer and hops. So we get rid of all that. We filter everything um, as far as that goes. But the minerals in Chicago water are pretty balanced, and you can go at a lot of different style water profiles based on that. So we use a fair amount of gypsum, a touch of calcium chloride, but definitely higher on the gypsum side, and make a profile that's higher in the sulfates to really help the hops pop, really make the
Right.
bitterness be clean, crisp, and as you increase the sulfate content, you kind of get those effects. So that was the profile. There's not a whole lot other than gypsum and a little calcium chloride to the levels we want them to be. Fortunately, like I said, Chicago has a good foundational base to add stuff to, and despite everything else going on in Chicago, they have always up to date water reports, and it allows making water adjustments easier and
Yeah.
reliable,
Yeah.
which
No,
is
that's
nice.
that's great. Yeah. Um, and then let's talk about hops for a little bit. You mentioned that you use three core hops in that. Um, talk to me about the hopping technique. How you balance hot side versus potentially any kind of dry hopping you might do to that to help push some of that aromatic components. And yeah, let's walk into that for a little bit.
So we did want to get some more quote unquote hop flavor in this one. So we do have some staged additions toward the end of the boil. At what is it anymore? 10 minutes. And then we used to have a 30-minute addition, but we got rid of that because it was such a small amount. It was not really adding a whole lot to the beer. So we pushed that into the 10-minute edition. Then we have a whirlpool edition. We're really big fans of late hot editions. So,
Yeah.
like 205, something like that. We find that we get a good amount of bitterness, a nice bitterness from those additions, but also get the dual effect of getting a lot of flavor into the beer from the hops and retaining a lot of aromatic properties, since it's not ripping boiling anymore. And
Right.
we'll just chuck in the hops and start crashing it through the chiller right away. So
still hot enough to get some isomerization, but still
yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
a softer bitterness from it.
Absolutely. And we get, I mean, our utilization isn't as high as with those additions, obviously, but it's a nice balance between flavor and aromatics. Anymore, most of our hoppy beers, we tend to, even the kind of classic styles and West Coast styles, will generally not add a whole lot of hops, later than, I guess, or sooner than with 30 minutes left in the boil. That's when we'll start messing with hops usually, but typically 15 minutes and less is where we like to do a lot of our hoppings, and it works well.
So you're brewing on a decent sized system, and of course we talk about whirlpooling times and whatnot, but it's so dependent on the speed at which things can cool down.
Yeah,
and a lot of that is determined by the size of that kettle. So for you, how quickly does that start to drop temperature, and then how longer?
As soon as the boil's done, we'll start spinning it. We can get it down to, like I said, 205 or so within 10 minutes. We'll usually spin it for, and then we'll add the hops right then, give it about 10 minutes just to stand and form a nice cake on the bottom so we don't gum up the chiller. And then we'll start knocking out. And by the end of the knockout, the beer, it's probably in the high 190s, but you mentioned isomerization. All that decreases pretty quickly as temperature goes down. So if you get 5-degree difference, 200 and 205, you're going to get a lot of different, I guess, characteristics out of the beer. We were worried initially that adding the hops, exactly what you said, because it takes an hour to knock out, 45 minutes to transfer the beer over. And when we're done, we're like, oh shit, is this going to be super bitter? Because the beer is still, or the wort's still pretty hot, but it drops off pretty quickly. So yeah, you are getting some IBUs, but it's so minimal that we just compensate by, I mean, that was one of the reasons, instead of doing a 30-minute addition, we just moved it closer to the end, and you get a little less bitterness on the hot side, and then you just make up for that in the whirlpool.
Sure. No, and I love that it happens. And when I was talking to Andy from Great Notion on an episode a couple years ago, he was mentioning that that's how they dial in their IBU goals. The temperature that they are whirlpooling at will impact the ultimate expression of bitterness in the beer. And if they want it to be more bitter, they just keep the temperature up. And it's such an interesting and weird way now that, to think about brewers, adjusting these kinds of parameters.
I was going to say, you mentioned that. That's right when we were getting going, until we really, really learned the system, we would mess with hop timings, 5-minute increments here and there. And I think we have we know our utilization right at whirlpool out, right when, the boil or the steam is turned off. We know it at 205. Some beers we used to spin the wort down and get it into the 180s to really try to get no bitterness. And I guess what I'm saying is we learn the temperatures and how much our system pulls out bitterness versus flavor. And we seem to have really good luck at starting at 205. And that's just the right amount of time in there to get, I don't know, about 7% utilization out of the hops for IBU wise, but keep a lot of the aromas and flavors in there without just essentially driving them off from being too hot.
Sure. I want to talk about the quality of that bitterness, but first, the founders launched SS BrewTech with a very clear goal to advance brewing equipment design, performance, and quality to the very highest standards in the industry, with a team that draws upon strong functional backgrounds in brewing science, mechanical engineering, industrial design, supply chain, and manufacturing. SS has the people and skill sets you want and expect from your supplier of pro brewing equipment. Head over to ssbrewtech.com for more information on their brew houses and brewing gear. Also, there's nothing easy about brewing beer. It's an intricate, time-consuming art. The last thing you need to face is a recall or contamination that can hurt your pride and your pocketbook. Clarion lubricants meet strict purity and performance standards to help make your system 100% food safe. That's protection for your equipment and your beer. So make the switch to Clarion and ensure your system is running smooth and safe. Go to clarionlubricants.com to learn more. So Adam, talk to me about, how you, number one, set up, are you staging which hops go in, at these varying times. Is there some quality to that kind of bitterness that comes from this later whirlpool hopping versus, say, earlier in that boil?
Well, I feel like when we want real sustained bitterness for like a West Coast style, I love Warrior, and we'll use that's pretty much. Other if we're doing a traditional lager, we'll use, German hops or whatever it is throughout the whole process. But for everything else, we'll use Warrior to actually get IBUs, and that will be the only type of earlier, quote unquote, bittering addition we'll typically do in any of the beers. The cohumulone.
What is it about Warrior that you really like?
It has it's potent. Two, it's got a low cohumulone. It just results in a really smooth, pleasant bitterness as compared to some other hops, in our opinion. And I know there's been, I think was the one that came out a year or so ago. Pato was the new high alpha hop that they were pushing for being kind of like a Warrior replacement, because it is stronger in alphas, but I don't know. It wasn't the same. Warrior is our bittering hop of choice. It's great. It's smooth. And it delivers a fair amount of alphas in there. As far as anything later on, we try not to boil maybe harsher bittering hops as long, which is why we tend to add those so late, because they're really not getting thoroughly boiled at that point. Even if it's in there for 10 minutes, you're not ripping it for 90. Usually our entire boil process is 90 minutes. And all those hops toward the end are mostly geared toward, one, just touching up the bitterness slightly, and two, mainly getting aromas and flavor into the beer. So any hops that we want to add to get bitterness in there will be of the Warrior kind of style, where it results in nice bitterness and it's really predictable. And all the other ending hops are more for, I guess, other properties that we're trying to get at, not really bitterness. They do add some, but it's percentage wise, we're talking, I don't know, right. It's so low compared to what the Warrior's bringing. Let's talk
about that aroma component then. Obviously when you start adding them into the hot side, you've got heat, that all of those aromatic components can volatilize, and the moment you start adding them in is the moment that they start blowing off and you start losing them. From your perspective, are there some adjustments that you all have made to try to keep more of that aroma into the beer so that it expresses when people open it, rather than popping out in your production process?
Yeah, so originally we would whirlpool and kind of chuck the hops in right as we started. We tried a lot of like 5-minute additions, stuff like that. We moved them, as I mentioned, just to knock off that boil about 5, 6, 7 degrees. And that helped out a lot, obviously. But it's kind of interesting to see how much 5 degrees really does affect the final product. So really starting our whirlpool additions in that 205 range has been huge. We're spinning the wort at that point, so the hops kind of get sucked right down into there. We don't let them float on the top. Kind of get everything we can to dissolve into that wort, and you're going to lose some. It's just the nature of how it goes. But
sure,
Really the biggest thing was not chucking our, aroma hops in at really 205 was kind of like the magic temperature, right around there. 206 is fine too, but that was the biggest, I guess, I don't know what you want to call it,
Sure.
realization that we had on our particular system.
Right.
We keep, once the hops go in, all the manways and stuff, the top doors are closed, keep everything. If it does condense and fall back into the beer, it's better than blowing out the stack.
Sure. Sure.
And then we just start knocking out right away, and trying to get that right to pitching temperatures as fast as possible.
Yeah. On the cold side, do you dry hop? And if you do, what does that kind of process look like for you?
Well, we went through, we do.
And you're not biotransforming these, right? This is classic West Coast.
Right. So we used to, when we started Charlatan, we would kind of do a Vinny Sorlurzo double dry hop stage, West Coast. We went through a lot of different methods for trying to get the most aroma and into the beer from the dry hops.
Yeah.
And we settled on pretty much the day it hits terminal is when, for Charlatan, we'll do a nice heavier load dry hop, and then we'll let it sit for only about a day and then crash it. So it's usually pretty much all of our dry hops, as soon as they're added for the main dosing. For the hazies, we'll do stage additions to get some biotransformation in there.
Yeah.
But when the main load of dry hops gets added, we like to get it cold within a day pretty much. We found that letting it sit, and there's different theories on this, everyone has their own methods, but we found that the sooner we get the beer cold, and it doesn't take as long as, a lot of folks like letting their hops sit warm for 2-3 days, and then they might step it down or do something. We've tried all that, and just for our money's worth, getting that beer cold after the hops has been, dry hopped within 24 hours works out very, very well for creating sustained aromatics that really last through packaging and all that stuff.
So you're cooling the tanks down. Are you dropping hops out of there also at the same time? Or, talk to me, what does that process look like?
So for Charlatan, we'll get the hops in there. Like I said, let them sit a day. Then we'll crash it down to 32, 33. Charlatan, we like to get nice and cold because we want it to end up as bright as possible and really drop kind of everything out of there. So we'll give it a good dump out of the bottom of the cone, transfer to the bright tank, and onward it goes. For the hazies, we like doing a biotransformation addition, which is typically at fermentation temperatures, which is right around 68, 69, depending on the beer. And that will be a much smaller dose than kind of the big dry hop load. And then once the beer is done fermenting, we'll do a very large dry hop addition. Again, let it sit on there for about a day. Let me back up. In the middle of those two additions, usually we'll step down the tank to about 60 to knock down some of those first biotransforming hops, try to get all the yeast to flock out so they're not sticking to any of the hops in there. And then we'll do the bigger addition. And then it continues on like Charlatan, where we'll knock it down, except for we'll only crash any of our hazies usually to 36, 37. And we found that really helps throughout the whole process, just creating sustained aromatics and really stable haze and, everything kind of you want in a hazy. You want that nice, thick body and haze and, saturated hops. And we see that if we go too cold with those, sometimes you could run into issues.
Yeah. When you're, packaging hoppy beers, are there any other additional concerns that you've pushed through on that production side? Because you're clearly packaging a lot of those beers.
Mm-hmm.
in order to kind of maintain that aromatic component and make sure that those beers pop out of the can.
Yeah, we are obsessed and crazy with purging. We
Yeah,
purge the living hell out of our tanks, our lines, everything. It doesn't take a lot of oxygen to ruin a hazy beer. One of my pet peeves is getting, it doesn't have to be a lot, and I wish it was more of a focus for some places. Just a small amount of oxygen. Well, it's like, why? What's the point of using all these hops if they're going to taste sweet and like they're gone? It just that slight bit of oxygen will kill
right.
a hoppy beer. So we are crazy obsessed with that. We don't have the fanciest of canning lines, but we really spent a lot of time working it out, and our DO numbers for honestly a canning line that it's not fancy, but we're getting on our hazies, we're usually in the 30s parts per
Yeah,
billion, which is right up there with any of kind of the best lines that you can get
sure,
for
sure.
total package oxygen, and we're really proud of that. We spent a lot of time figuring out how to do that on this system, and we won't every single packaging run we won't package a beer unless it's pretty much 50 parts per billion is our top end, but that's rare. Everything is pretty much under 40, 30 to 40, and we won't go. I mean, we won't put it in the can if we can't figure it out. If we can't get it that low, then we know something has gone awry, or there's something up with the canner. There's a leak in one of the lines somewhere. Who knows? But we'll figure it out before it goes into the can, because if you're going to spend 16, 17 bucks on a 4-pack of hoppy beer, it better damn well be popping
Sure,
out of that
sure.
can when you open it. There's nothing worse than going and trying a hazy, and it's like, you could tell right off the bat the color's a little off, the aroma's just a little muted. You taste it, tastes a little sweet, a little kind of cardboardy and cheesy. It's like, oh shit, man, just get your DOs right.
The coolest thing, I love watching social media where brewers start posting their DO meter readings,
Oh yeah, yeah.
because, it's a badge of pride for, for fellow brewers to say, that's where we got it. Obviously to get that into total package auction, your bright tanks have to be much lower than that, which is of course that process of getting everything down. And then, at every point where, from pumps to hoses to whatnot, like there's every single, element between that bright tank and that canning line can also screw you up and add
Yeah,
more
and
into that.
I'll say, some people don't believe how much you put on a tri clamp, for whatever the line you're going to run to your canner or transfer hose or whatever, and honestly, you tighten by hand, get a little screwdriver, get it in there, or just that extra amount of tightness could really have an effect. You might be sucking in just the smallest amount of oxygen in there, but over a whole transfer, it's not leaking out beer, so the lines look like they're connected, but they're just not tightened down enough. And something as stupid as that could really have a lasting effect on your final product. And we've learned that, honestly, kind of the hard way when we first got the canner and figuring it out. We were, completely new to this or to canning. And we had batches that wound up in, like 200s and 300s. And we didn't know that until, one, we invested in a proper DO meter. Two, we started having our beer tested, because like, this tastes great. And a week later, you're like, this is not, we're getting oxygen in there. Where is it coming from? So if there's any advice I can offer any smaller brewery, it is, a DO meter is a huge but worth it investment. They're not cheap, but if you could swing it, that is the number one thing I would recommend getting if you're packaging bottles or cans.
It's definitely a piece, and especially now as the cost of canning lines comes down, and you can find a single head American Canning or Wild Goose, for $20,000, and all of
Mm-hmm.
a sudden you're canning. But while that seems like a really reasonable cost for small breweries, the cost of recalling a beer, one, because it has gotten, shattered and oxidized and your customers aren't happy with it, the cost of that is so much more expensive, than even your capital expenditure of buying this canning line. And so, as you get into it, figuring out that entire system, testing it before you ever try to sell something, can be incredibly, incredibly important. And it's something that even some of the best breweries that I've had beer from have all had to dial in. It's not, there's no shame in having to do that, but just put the work in before you start selling that kind of thing, because upset consumers who are disappointed by your beer are even more costly to you than any of this equipment.
Yeah, I mean, we had to learn. That was one thing we absolutely happened to us. We were doing a hazy years ago, and one of the CO2 lines in the back of the canner, there's like a compression fitting, and it had a crack in it, and we didn't notice it. So we went through the canning run, and we had some pretty badly oxidized beer. This was before we had the meter or any of that stuff, which is also, it's dumb. If you're going to get a canning line, get the DO meter at the same time you get the canning line. We made that mistake, and it's like, what are we doing? Because exactly what you just said. And then you got a massive headache on your hand with trying to get that beer back and making your customers, making them whole and making them right for spending money to get an oxidized beer. So yeah, it's a lot of like you said, put in the work, learn your canner, back and forth, and we have several upgrades to our canner that we put in place just to knock off DO where we can. We switched from a traditional can rinse system to using ionized air rinser. So, that's just, it's not like that water. You're using deaerated water, then it's fine. But any sort of, we can get 5 less parts per billion somewhere on the line. Sure. We would do it. And there was certainly
any remnant water droplets in your rinser,
like our canner,
could potentially add oxygen. Sure.
We had a weird just design in the canner where one of the air valves for the compressor where you connect to the canner, like the exhaust was damn near over where the can's filled. So this doesn't make sense. So we rerouted that to the under. So just any sort of draft, this is not a counter pressure filler. So it's, we'd have to be very cognizant about crosswinds, draft. We don't can with our bay doors fully open in the summer, we have to open one or else it gets too hot. But just to keep crosswinds down, like all these weird things that you might not think about. So yeah, how much is wind gonna affect a canner if you're foaming over and stuff? And it really does. You can get 20, 30 parts per billion plus pickup just from shutting a drafty door. It's so yeah, put in the time. It will treat you right, and having happy customers and more shelf stable beer, which is, that's what you want.
Unless you want to do it the Sierra Nevada way and just put some live yeast in there and,
you can do it that way too.
Let us scour your stuff out too. Yeah. Well, we've talked a whole bunch about hoppy beers, but I feel like we should talk about, some stouts also before we get out of here. Obviously, I'd love your Fat Pug, oatmeal stout. Talk to me a little bit about, that kind of stout category. Honestly, you're in Chicago. It gets cold in the winters. Stouts are great beers. There's plenty of fans for that kind of style. But you play in that stout spectrum and everything from kind of drinkable, sessionable stouts way up into, full-on barrel-aged pastry stouts. And, we did just get some of those from you a couple days ago. I think it was on Friday because we have beers coming in for our stout issue right now.
How many do you guys just not eat during those days to make up the calorie difference from tasting?
We sample in very small amounts, but talk to me about your approach on this, kind of constructing sessionable stouts and, how you build the kind of flavor and body in a very light stout.
So, Fat Pug was, like I said, that was our second production beer. And we really like just 5-6% stouts. It's always had a place in my heart for whether, whatever the style of stout is, but that kind of ABV range. And we were a huge fan of Left Hand. What is it? God, jeez.
Nitro Milk Stout?
Nitro Milk Stout, yeah. I was thinking of, all right, never mind. But yeah, so the Left Hand Nitro Milk Stout. And we noticed that, honestly, there was not really anyone making them in Chicago. And they were almost the only game in town for that style. And like, why isn't anyone making them here? I feel like our accounts would love to have a locally made milk stout. We offered it in both nitro and CO2. So that was kind of the inspiration for it. And then we went through a ton of iterations and learning how you mentioned to get body into those beers without making them overly heavy, because at the end of the day, it's a 5.5% beer. It should drink, more full than a 5.5% American Pale or something like that. But it also doesn't need to be so thick that you're, weighed down by one beer. So we went through a ton of different just adjuncts for that and percentages, and I mean, oats, touch of wheat, and small amount of lactose. That was before lactose became such a high percentage predominant focus in a lot of these pastry beers. It's a small percentage just to round out the body and add a little bit of smoothness, creaminess. That with the oats.
How small is small? Do you remember?
Percentage wise, lactose?
Yeah.
Let me do, I know the exact, I'll do some quick math here. So you're talking under 5%.
Yeah.
So for like, whereas we're doing, the pastry stouts, it's where lactose is used, it's a lot more, quite a bit more. It was half a bag, 27.5 pounds per turn for Fat Pug, which is not a whole lot, but it's enough to really just round it out. It's almost like the white wheats idea in the pails I was talking about. You want just something to kind of meld things together, add a touch of backbone there and body, and without being overboard. And we used to use all sorts of different roasted malts in there, trying to really dial in a huge flavor profile in a more drinkable stout. And it just took some batches, but we're happy with the way it wound up. And
what's the rest of the malt look like in that? You gonna say Pilsner malt for Fat Pug?
Yeah, that's actually one of the beers that still does not use Pilsner malt, even though we switched pretty much everything to using Pilsner. We use Pale, so it's, whereas like the 2-row, it does have a difference for Pilsner malt. Obviously, it does, but in our opinion, the effects are less so than using something like a pale malt. So we use raw pale, which is more almost like, we get almost like an English pale malt based note out of it. It's a little bit darker in color, has a little bit more substance to it. So that forms the base. And then we use just a blend of different, we got pale chocolate in there, Carafa 3, the dehusked version, roasted barley, what else is in there? And then a small amount of an English crystal, like a 75-80 Lava Bond crystal. And then I almost forgot, Munich. We have Munich in there. So there's a lot. There's a fair amount of grain in there, varieties for such a small beer, but they all, in such a small beer, I feel like they all have more profound effects. They're not outweighed by giant pastry stout. You're obviously can get sweetness up front by whatever else you're doing to. This is, you still have, you taste there and let the beer warm up and taste it at different temperatures. You can taste a lot of those contributions in Fat Pug, and it's, it's a low ABV beer, and it's it's very flavorful. So
building that kind of spectrum of flavors, that start with those kind of, sweeter biscuity barley notes, and then kind of move through these caramel ranges, without landing in any one of those spots, because it, kind of stretches across that spectrum out into the kind of, roasty, coffee-ish malt kind of character out there. But that kind of spectrum and hitting those different frequencies along the way, tends to build this kind of, broader, fuller idea of body in it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I love music metaphors, and I will always revert back to that if I ever can. But that's when we've been tasting these and thinking about them, over the last year, that that was the kind of the piece, like what is it that's giving us this note right here? It's not stretching into the kind of deeper, darker space, but it's also supporting it and kind of creating a bridge from the lightest malt flavors into those darker malt flavors. And again, kind of spreading, carrying you along through that range seems to be the key on that smaller stout
and I would
elements.
say keep the percentages of those, I guess, specialty grains, all of them. I mean, you don't need to go crazy with them.
Right.
You'd be surprised at how much a couple percentage of roasted barley will really add depth to the beer without being, because you don't want it to be. You don't want it to be so roasty where it almost comes off as acrid or
sure,
kind of like, I don't know, just burnt for lack of a better description.
Right.
You want to amplify all the other flavors in there. So small percentages of each kind of play off each other really well, especially in such light beers, because it's easy to go overboard with, the heavily roasted grains.
Right.
And then to me, all you're tasting is you get that quote unquote roast character, which is, it's fine, but you want to taste some coffee notes, some chocolate notes, some almost raisiny dark notes in there. And it's easy to go over the top with that by a percentage or two. And you don't need a lot to get all those into the beer.
Are there any specific heavily roasted malts that you find, produce a more pleasant character, across your stouts?
Yeah, we've really been happy with Midnight Wheat from Breeze lately. That is, I'd say by far, we use a lot of Carafa 3 traditionally in our stouts, but in the last year or so, we've been moving a lot of those, what would be Carafa additions, or just supplementing those with Midnight Wheat. And Carafa has the husk removes, a special one, and it's supposed to be a smoother kind of note, and it is, but for our flavor profiles and our taste buds, Midnight Wheat delivers a lot more toward that, just providing this awesome dark roasted note without being burnt. It's like actual dark chocolate, dark notes that play really well in stouts. So I can see us continuing to kind of, as we go back and if we retweak recipes, replacing a lot of the Carafa additions with Midnight Wheat or supplementing,
Sure. If I think about it in like color temperature, that Midnight Wheat ends up with like a warm, soft white color temperature, where some of the other heavily roasted barleys can give you a more like cool daylight tone, and so it doesn't feel quite as comforting. It's a little more precise, which especially as you get up in the ABV level, may not exactly be the goal for that kind of beer.
Right.
But well, let's zoom out for a minute, as we wrap up here. For Maplewood, as a business, what's success look like for you all? What do you hope to achieve, or have you already achieved it? If not, how will you know that you've achieved that?
The initial goal was getting to 10,000 barrels, and we did that in a few years, which is kind of still my mind's blown that we were able to grow in such a competitive marketplace. But now the end goal is we've been looking at several properties to try and build out a proper production facility. Like I said, we did not have a budget when we opened this place. We made it work. It works. It works well, but it's we didn't have the budget to lay things out probably how they should have from the start. And that's just the way it was. But now that we've continued to grow and we have sustained distribution and we have a whole, we're in several states. It's time to build out the production facility that kind of we always wanted. So that is our number one priority for this upcoming year, at least to get that going, and hopefully be able to produce beer out of there by mid next year, which is a little ambitious, but at some point next year, I'll consider it within our time frame goal. So that's it. Grow, finally can order our sweet brew house and have everything done the way we want it done, and just continue to grow a little bit. I don't think any of us here have delusions of the 100,000, 200,000 barrel brewery anymore. I think that's just becoming, there's so many breweries and there's a whole mess of headaches that come with growth to that size. We want to become more so a regional brewery. We're kind of in that level you mentioned earlier, and just really hone in on that comfortable kind of mid-range of production where we're making a good clip of beer, but also not so much beer where, you're like essentially just giant manufacturing at that point. And we want to be flexible. We want to have batches where we can do a small batch of something fun like we've been doing, and not have a brew house that's such that, we're going to do this really weird style, but hey, you got 400 barrels of it to deal with, like go sell it type of thing. And I think the range we're looking at is in like the 50 to 60 barrel brew house range, which we could run a little lower, higher, and do smaller releases, stay nimble, evolve with the market, and as well as put out, a lot of product for our distribution partners.
Sure. Well, sounds like a fun approach, focusing on the classics as well as some of these more creative kinds of expressions that you do. But we've definitely appreciated tasting your thoughtful approach to all of these kinds of things across that spectrum. G&D chillers are the craftsmen who know that good enough just won't cut it. Pathfinder N-Pure Seltzer Nutrient ensures reliable and complete fermentation. Craft juice concentrates from Old Orchard are packed with real fruit first. Set up your account on marketmybrewery.com today. Let SS Brewtech outfit your brew house and run smooth and safe with Clarion lubricants. Of course, if you'd like to support this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button. Hey, pro brewers, consider our new All Access Pro subscriptions that combine the magazine's exclusive online content and more. Adam, if people want to learn more about Maplewood, and where do they find you?
MaplewoodBrew.com. That's it. We have, all our social links are on there too. It's, I think, all except for Twitter. It's just at Maplewood Brew. Twitter is Maplewood Beer. We're still trying to get the brew because there's like a defunct, there's like a dead account from 10 years ago, and it's not active. There's nothing on it, and I don't know. We'll get it back someday. But just MaplewoodBrew.com. You'll find all the good stuff on there and links to whatever you may want to check out.
For sure. Well, thanks for joining me on the podcast today. It's been fun to talk to you about how you guys brew.
Hey, thanks for having me, and we'll look forward to sending you guys some more beers to taste. Hopefully making the episodes. We got to make the cut.
For sure. Well, yeah, cheers.
See ya.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.